Critical thinking is a skill that is in short supply right now. People need to start applying critical thinking and not just consuming information because it's dangerous.
Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success.
Welcome to Insights into Success, where today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Rather than having a guest on board today, I'm just going to be discussing the topic of critical thinking. Now, recently I published an interview with a guest on this very subject. However, it's fair to say I came away feeling quite disappointed with the interview. There was some good content, but certainly as the interview went on, I felt that it went off the rails a little bit and really undermined the credibility of the whole concept of critical thinking. I guess the first thing I want to do is discuss a comment that he made, which I think is a good example in terms of talking about critical thinking. Now, he referenced the fact that studies have been done that have found that carbon dioxide is good for a human. Now, that's a big statement, and it's also a very dangerous statement. And this is where it's important that people apply critical thinking. Now, I'm sure there's studies that say that if you eat an apple a day, that that's good for you. Well, what about if you eat 100 apples a day, or maybe 1,000 apples a day? Would they still find that they're good for you in that context? I suspect not. So the same applies when talking about carbon dioxide. Now, I don't propose to be an expert on the matter, but simply considering the concept of what he's saying, it's somewhat dangerous. That will lead a lot of people to think that just in general, carbon dioxide is good for you. Now, I suspect that if you look at studies, there will be studies that say to a certain point, carbon dioxide is good for you. But I'm equally sure, just as per the example with apples, that there will come a tipping point where it then becomes bad for you. So just to make a broad statement that carbon dioxide is good for you is a dangerous one to make. This is where it's important to apply critical thinking. Take a step back and consider the statement and reflect on what that actually means and the validity of it. Now, from my point of view, I'm not going to go away and do a lot of research on it. There's so much going on in the world these days. So for me, I just don't have the time. But anecdotally, just doing a thought experiment, you can appreciate the fact that in some sort of form or quantity, quite possibly it could be good for you. But to make that statement with no parameters around it is a dangerous statement to make. So I guess that was one thing that jumped out at me. Now, just, I guess, taking it a little bit further and talking about global warming. Now, I'm not an expert in global warming. I don't propose to be. And quite frankly, as I've just alluded to, there's so much else going on in the world, and not diminishing how important global warming potentially is. But it's not an area that I'm choosing to become an expert in. But nonetheless, I do have an opinion on that subject. And what I want to do is just sort of share with you how I derived my opinion. You don't have to agree with it, but just to understand again this concept of critical thinking. Now, to me, critical thinking involves taking a step back out of the noise and reviewing the landscape. So with global warming, what does that mean? Well, if we take a step back, here's the reality. There's going to be big business that wants you to believe that global warming exists. Why? Because if global warming exists, there's a lot of businesses out there that will see it as an opportunity to make a lot of money with what would be proposed to counter global warming. Equally, it's big business out there that wants you to believe that global warming doesn't exist, i.e. all the big petrochemical companies. They don't want you to think that global warming exists, because the reality is, if you believe that, then you'll potentially spend less with them. They're going to lose a lot of money. So that's the reality of the situation. There is big business on both sides of the coin that wants you to believe either there is global warming or there isn't global warming. That's the reality. And that's what you need to do when considering any issue is take a step back and review the landscape and consider the overall situation. So what does that mean then? It means there is going to be big business out there pumping money into studies to say there is global warming, and there's going to be big money out there pumping into studies to suggest that there isn't global warming. And the reality is that you can manipulate numbers to suit the narrative that you want if you truly want to. So for the average person, you're not going to really go through and deep dive into a lot of studies and then analyze them. And if you do, you've got to always be mindful of where did the funding come from for the study, because that's potentially tainted that study. So look, I'm not going to go down that track because I simply, as I say, have other things to do. But where am I at with global warming? So from my point of view, and again, I'm not trying to suggest you have to agree with me, but to understand my perspective, I've recognized the landscape. There's big money on either side of the coin. And then I've just said to myself, okay, well, without getting into a deep dive, I want to ask myself one question. Do I think that we as humans live in harmony with the earth or not? And to me, that's a simple answer. No, we don't. We do so many things that are not natural, that aren't in harmony with the earth. So if we're not living in harmony with the earth, is that likely to have a negative impact on the earth? The answer to me is yes. Yes, it will. So I look at what we do. I look at all the pollution that we're creating. It's all the unnatural gases that we're creating, or at least, if not unnatural, in quantities well beyond what normally would be created if we didn't exist. And I conclude that we've got to be having some sort of negative impact on the environment. Now, I know about how the Earth's core heats and cools, and a lot of people say, well, we'll just go through natural heating and cooling, and that's all it is. My view is taking into account how we live, it's pretty difficult not to conclude, in my opinion, that we are having a negative impact. So the likelihood that global warming exists, I think, is very high. To what extent, that is another issue, and that's an issue that I'm not qualified to answer because I simply don't have the time to spend on it. But personally, I believe that global warming exists, and I think it's a no-brainer, and I think it's crazy that people try and suggest otherwise. But before you get to that, the importance of what I'm trying to say here is how you approach it, so that you apply critical thinking. Now, you could apply critical thinking and come to a different conclusion. That's your choice. But it's about stepping back and considering the environment first before delving in further. So whether you believe in global warming or not, you should be able to step back and realize that there are people that are going to be promoting global warming and people that are going to be promoting that it doesn't exist. And there's going to be big money on both sides of the coin. Okay, so that's just one little aspect. Another area that I want to talk about, again, just to demonstrate critical thinking, is over a comment that my guest made when he said he only gets his source of information from Twitter, or X as it is now known. That, to me, is an example of a complete lack of critical thinking. If you are true to the concept of critical thinking, then you should be gathering information from a variety of sources and apply your critical thinking to determine what you believe to be the truth. If you're just going to get your information from one source, that's not critical thinking. You're totally tainted by that one source. Now, I sort of want to skirt politics to a point, but it's going to come up a little bit, unfortunately, as I give my examples on this. But there is a politician who his whole premise when he went forward was you can't trust the media. Everything the media says is untruthful. You must listen to me. I will give you the truth. Now, I don't care who that is. That is a scary thing for anyone to accept. Nobody should just accept what one person says. And what is a fact, it's not a debate, it's not contentious, but is a fact, is that person has been proven to be one of the most systemic liars the world has ever seen. That is a fact. Not my opinion, it's a fact. He has been shown time and time again to be lying and literally makes up the lies on the fly. But he would have you believe that you only believe or you only listen to what he has to say. So I don't care who it is, I don't care what the political persuasion is, you never ever just get your information from one source and believe it. Now, the concept of you can't believe anything in the media, that is complete nonsense. And it's been given a lot of airtime, the suggestion that nothing in the media is truthful. Again, no critical thinking. Step back and consider it. Consider that concept. So what they're saying is, for instance, when the media says such and such was killed in a car accident today, you can't believe it. It's not true. Or that there was some other event, there was a storm or whatever. You can't believe it. It's not true. Really? Really think that things have got that bad, that it's all just totally made up? I suggest to you that that is complete nonsense. The media still, to a point, publishes the truth. But clearly it's gone beyond that, and it has always been beyond that, to be fair. But critical thinking is required to identify what is a truth and what is opinion. So when someone says such and such was killed in a car accident today, I suggest to you that it's very reasonable to accept that that is the truth. And particularly if you see, that being reported in more than one locality, of more than one source. When the writer of the article says that that person was killed and the reason they were killed was because of the mismanagement of the local politician, that's opinion. That's not necessarily the truth. So it's so important to apply critical thinking so that you can decipher what is potentially the truth and what is opinion, which may not be the truth. But just to broad brush say that you can't believe anything in the media is just not acceptable. That is not borne out in fact. No question that some media is worse than others. No question. And to that end, you need to step back and consider the reality of who owns the media, what influence are having on what is being published. Now, case in point, Fox. Fox News was had a court case not very long ago with the Dominion voting machines. So in that case, they allegedly had defamed Dominion voting machines by suggesting that they had been manipulated so that the Democrats could win the election. Now, this is a court record. This is fact. It's not debatable. It is an absolute fact. Fox, their defense was they said that everyone knows, the public knows, that we are an entertainment channel, not a news channel. And as such, they know that they can't believe everything that we say. That's what Fox said as the defense. Not my opinion, that is a fact. So they put their hand up and admitted that a lot of what they publish on their channels is not truthful. So there is an example where if you want to listen to Fox, you need to take into account what they have said themselves. And that is that a lot of what they say is simply not truthful. A lot of it is just very much opinion-based. I mean, Maria Bartiromo recently said that there's the potential for America to go into recession. And if it does, it will be Biden's. That'll be Biden's fault. Now, that's her opinion, but I happen to have an honest degree in economics. So I have a reasonable understanding of how it all works. And the American economy was actually performing very well. Now, normally when a new government takes over, they do, for a period of time, they certainly inherit what's been going on with the previous government. So if things were negative, then it is reasonable to blame it initially, at least, on the previous government. However, in this case, that's not the case. The economy was actually performing very well. What's happening now is that the economy is becoming very, very unsettled because of the whole threat of tariffs and the on and off nature of it, and just the whole randomness of it. Now, the reality is that the economy, a lot of it depends on market sentiment, i.e., how people are feeling about things. And if people are feeling that things are very unstable, they don't know if there's going to be tariffs or there isn't going to be tariffs, that has a huge impact. And that's what we're seeing in America. But again, we've got someone on Fox suggesting that, it'll be the blaming of the previous administration. Complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And it's not just my opinion that it's nonsense. If you bother to research and understand more about economics, then you'd come to that conclusion. So, there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there at the moment. And again, we look at the other news channels. Who owns them? And what influence are they having? Now, we know recently that, for instance, the Washington Post and other newspapers are owned by billionaires who are stepping in and trying to influence what they print. So when you start consuming content from these channels, you need to understand the influences that are going on and how they may be tainting it. Now, just to give you an example of my processes I've gone through in this whole concept of critical thinking. Now, for whatever reason, back in 2015, I became interested in American politics. And I've always voted to the right. I've never voted to the left. I describe myself as being quite centralist, but tending to the right. So when I heard about this businessman that was going to be running for president, I thought that was a good thing. I thought potentially get a business person in that really knows how to run government, sick of politicians that often just, feel like they possibly aren't good at doing things in the business world, so they end up as a politician, that they can be corrupt, etc., etc. Just the general sort of perception of politicians. So I became interested in it. I started researching that individual, and I've ended up in a very, very different position to where I started. But I come from the right. I don't come from the left. I come from the right. So I've ended up in quite a different position at the end. Well, it's a continuation, really, of my journey through understanding American politics. Now, to understand that more, I recognize that if I would go and consume content that comes from Democrats, then I'm going to get a very biased view, i.e., of what Democrats think. So being mindful of that, I've always considered where I get my content from. And one of the things I've been particularly interested in is consuming content from Republicans about Republicans. Now, a lot of those Republicans are Republicans that are now no longer officially part of the party, because the Republican Party is not what it used to be. I'm sure John McCain, for instance, would be turning in his grave as to where it is right now compared to where it was. So I've come to my conclusions about American politics by trying to apply critical thinking, being aware that if I consume just Democratic information, then that's going to be very biased. Equally, if I go and consume all the MAGA stuff, that's going to be very biased. So I've tried to really gather information from a variety of sources. I don't consume it from one source. I get it from a lot of sources, and I'm particularly interested in what former Republicans have got to say. Republicans that are potentially retired or resigned. And of course, taking into account, if it was acrimonious, their split, why was that, and understanding that and how that might taint what they've got to say. We all need to apply critical thinking. The world is awash right now with lies. There is so much misinformation out there and disinformation. I've got someone that I know that's close to a family who has gone down the QAnon route. And they believe that, for instance, Donald Trump was always president. He never left office. January 6th never happened. That was all the media created that. The Queen was dead for years before she actually died. You watch Coronation Street in England, and then you get secret messages about what's going on. There's this big cabal that goes around eating and drinking the blood of children, on and on and on. And when I ask them where they get their information from, the response is, I only go to TikTok. TikTok is my source of information. That's the only thing you can believe. What to say to that? Again, an example of someone that is going to one source of information and forming all these opinions. That is so dangerous. That is an example of zero critical thinking. You need to consume information from a variety of sources and understand about where that source of information is coming from and why it might be tainted and in what way it might be tainted, and try and sift through it. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of hard work, but the reality is we need critical thinking more than ever. More than ever. I mean, I've just been watching some stuff by some of the politicians in America, and they're barefaced lying, and the information is there. I mean, we've had a situation where there's been inadvertently a member of the media has been invited into a chat group and has had highly confidential information shared with them. And the response when Pete Hegseth was confronted about it was deny, 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 and attack the member of the media that disclosed the information. Totally denied it, despite the fact his own government had already acknowledged the fact that it is true, and despite the fact that that person in the media has all the information to support that it's true. Yet, he's gone on the media and said it's all lies, he can't be trusted, etc. That's how bad it's got. We've got constant gaslighting going on, people trying to make you think something that is totally not true. I mean, this is George Orwell's 1984 going on here. Don't believe your lying eyes. It is just extraordinary. So more than ever, whether this is about business, whether it's about politics, whatever, you need to apply critical thinking. Don't just accept information. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily go away and do massive research. Like, for instance, my view I've got on global warming, it's being pragmatic considering all the facts. I'm not an expert in it, but I've come to my opinion, I think, based on some fairly reasonable reasoning. You need to make some sort of an effort. Don't just consume information and believe it all, but equally don't just go the other way and go, oh, nothing in the media is true, because that's not the case. Clearly, some things are true. You just need to be able to work through it and identify what you consider to be the truth and what isn't. Critical thinking is a skill that is in short supply right now. People need to start applying critical thinking and not just consuming information, because it's dangerous. Look where we are right now. We've got a huge number of people in America that have not applied critical thinking and have gone down a rabbit hole and are now starting to see the consequences. And the sad thing is that a lot of the people that went down that rabbit hole are the ones that are going to get hurt the most by what's going on. The whole stability in the world is at question or in question at the moment. Um, and a lot of it's got to do with the fact people haven't applied critical thinking. And if they had, then certain people wouldn't have got to power because it's blatantly obvious that they can't tell the truth. They have some fundamental issues, just are simply not qualified for the role. But sadly, the world is now paying the price for that lack of critical thinking. So the sooner people can realize the importance of critical thinking and start applying it, the sooner we can get the world back to a more stable position. So that's my thoughts on critical thinking. As I say, it's something that we all need to apply, particularly at this point in time in history. Sadly, there's too many parallels right now to the 1930s, and we don't want history to repeat, although history does have a habit of repeating. So please apply critical thinking, whatever aspect of your life that is. Don't be lazy and just accept things, question things. But equally, not proposing that you put yourself into a tailspin by every single thing you have to question. Because that's the other thing that's happened, is that people have become obsessed about there being constantly some sort of untoward goings on behind the scenes, that nothing can be just simply as it is. There's always got to be some sort of conspiracy going on. You know, there is such a thing as coincidences. There's such a thing as things just happening. Not everything has to be some great conspiracy. But unfortunately, a lot of people out there right now have become so indoctrinated that they think everything is a conspiracy and everything is about the rich controlling the world. And you know what? A lot of those people that believe that are actually making that come true because of what they've done with their vote in America. And what we're seeing now is really the crystallization of what was accused of happening in the past is certainly happening before our eyes right now, where the power is going to the few that are very rich. So it's somewhat ironic that this is happening when those out there that belong to QAnon and the like think that this is about cleansing and removing all these cabals, whatever you want to call them, you know. So very sad to see what's happening and the sheer ignorance of people, which, as I say, comes back to just a complete lack of critical thinking. So the sooner we can all take a step back, consider the landscape, and apply some rigorous analysis of the information that we get, the sooner we'll get back to a safer world.